After the Second World War, the Nuremberg Trials were held, which aimed to bring the main aggressors of the conflict to justice. The remaining members of Hitler's Nazi government and Inner Circle were brought in front of a judge, with prominent figures such as Rudolf Hess and Hermann Goring amongst the defendants. After the proceedings had come to an end, a number of those on trial found themselves being sentenced to death and were executed by infamous US executioner John C. Woods. One of those men condemned to die for his crimes was Arthur Seyss-Inquart, a man who served Hitler in a number of different positions. So join us today as we look at the execution of Arthur Seyss-Inquart, and remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Arthur Seyss-Inquart was born in 1892 inside of a German-speaking Czech town. Within this city there was a rivalry between the Germans and the Czechs, and his parents were well respected in the local area, with his father being a local school principal. His father was Czech and his mother was German, but in 1907 the family moved to Vienna. It was here where Seyss-Inquart studied law, and then as the First World War broke out, he enlisted inside of the Austrian army, and saw service in a number of different countries. He served in the war and was a decorated soldier, but following the end of the conflict, he pursued a career in law. He set up his own practice in 1921, and remained inside of Vienna, but he became involved in the Fatherland Front, a right-wing nationalist group, within Austria. Because of his talents as a lawyer, he was invited to join the cabinet of then Chancellor of Austria, Engelbert Dollfuss, but the following year in 1934, Dollfuss was murdered, and then he became a councillor under Kurt Schuschnigg. However, whilst being involved in government, Seyss-Inquart began to study the racial politics of Heinrich Himmler's ideology, and he began to become obsessed in the ideas of Aryan racism theories. He knew that the politics in Austria were becoming more right-wing, but in February 1938 he became the Minister of the Interior. He was given this position after Chancellor Schuschnigg was threatened by Hitler, who was warning him of a German invasion. But Schuschnigg later resigned, and Seyss-Inquart was given the position of the Chancellor of Austria. But the day after this, the German soldiers crossed into Austria, and Seyss-Inquart practically invited them to do so. Hitler then famously rode into Vienna in joyous celebrations, and Hitler absorbed Austria into his Third Reich, beginning a full Anschluss or annexation of the country. Seyss-Inquart later did join the Nazis, but he remained in favour of becoming Hitler's personal representative in Austria. Alongside other high-ranking Nazis, he worked for Hitler and served as an honorary SS member, and then became part of Hitler's cabinet. He became a Reich minister without portfolio, and after this he ordered Jews to be sent to concentration camps, and began to organise this in Austria, as well as the seizing of Jewish property. He later became the deputy to the Governor-General of Poland, Hans Frank, and he was fully behind the persecution of the Jews that occurred inside the country, and he also backed the murder of members of the Polish society. Seyss-Inquart must have been seen at the time as a reliable member of Hitler's inner circle, as he then became the Reichskommissar for the occupied Netherlands in May 1940. Following the invasion, he was involved in creating close ties with Germany and the Netherlands, and using the resources of the conquered nation to help the German war effort. He was mocked by the Dutch, but backed the Dutch NSB, allowing them to make a police force, but as time went on political parties were banned inside the Netherlands, and Seyss-Inquart was the real power within the country, with a direct line to Hitler. He was involved in suppressing the population, and also preventing resistance, and he sanctioned around 1,200 executions of political prisoners and Dutch people who were rising up against the occupiers. Seyss-Inquart was also involved in overseeing the 3 concentration camps within the Netherlands, and in these over 500,000 Dutch people were forced to work for the Germans, and were forced to help the German war effort. His devotion to the Nazis and his anti-Semitic attitude meant that as soon as he arrived within the Netherlands, he began to organise deportations of Jews to transit camps, and also took measures to force them to wear stars and be persecuted in public. Within the Netherlands there were a number of Jews sent to camps such as Mauthausen and Auschwitz, where they were then sent into the gas chambers. 140,000 Jews were registered in the country, but only 30,000 Dutch Jews lived out the war. But as the Second World War turned against the Germans, following the Normandy landings and the failings at Stalingrad, the Netherlands found itself involved in some of the fiercest fighting there during the Allied advancements. Hitler and the Nazi government tried to adopt a scorched earth policy, or a Nero decree, where docks and harbours and other infrastructure were being destroyed to prevent it falling into Allied hands. Seyss-Inquart did not see the point in this and saw the destruction as a waste of time and resources, but the people in the Netherlands began to suffer greatly. Within the country, there was a significant food shortage which left the population starving. Because of this, he had to negotiate with the Allies to allow them to drop food to people inside of the Netherlands from aircraft to save many of the civilians. But he did not want to surrender and give over the country. As the Soviets advanced into Berlin, Hitler took his own life, and following this his successor Karl Dönitz took the position of president. In this new government, the Flensburg government, Seyss-Inquart replaced Joachim von Ribbentrop as the foreign minister, and this was outlined by Hitler to happen. Hitler respected his Austrian friend and saw him as a valuable asset to liaise with other countries in the months following his death. He stayed in this job until he was arrested on the Elbe Bridge in Hamburg. But after this he was taken in for interrogation by the British and was then later transferred across to Nuremberg prison to be placed on trial in the Nuremberg Trials. Alongside defendants such as Hans Frank, Joachim von Ribbentrop, Rudolf Hess and Hermann Goring, Seyss-Inquart was charged with 4 crimes. These were conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, planning, initiating and waging wars of aggression, war crimes, and also crimes against humanity. In this trial he stated how he did not know anything about the war crimes he was accused of, which included the deportation of Jews and shootings of prisoners and hostages. He claimed he objected to the deportation of Jews, and the mass evacuations were forced, he said. He denied anything and the fact he was a criminal, saying his conscience was untroubled, and he claimed that he made things better for the Dutch people. This was of course not true with deportations, executions, and the fact the country was starving heavily towards the end of the war. He even accused the Allies of deporting people and resettling Germans after the war, and he stated that, "My last word is a principle which I have always acted and to which I will adhere to in my last breath. I believe in Germany." But Seyss-Inquart was acquitted and found not guilty of 1 crime, and that was a conspiracy charge. But he was found guilty of the other 3, and because of this was sentenced to death for his involvement in the Second World War and the Nazi policies that caused much suffering. It was his brutal suppression of resistors and opponents to the Nazi regime, along with the deportations and atrocities against the Jews in the lands which he was involved in, that sent him to the gallows. It was particularly felt in the Netherlands that his actions warranted him being sentenced to death. When he heard of the death sentence, he stated that death by hanging, "Well, in my view of the whole situation, I never expected anything different, it's all right." Inside the gymnasium of Nuremberg prison, a gallows had been created by US Army soldiers. It was infamous executioner John C. Woods who carried out the executions that morning, on the 16th of October 1946, and he was known for botching a number of them. The trapdoor was too small, it was said, and a number of Nazis hit their heads as they fell through, and some executions took up to 28 minutes to be completed and for one of the defendants to be certified dead. Arthur Seyss-Inquart was the final defendant of the Nuremberg Trials to go to his execution. Shortly after Alfred Jodl was pronounced dead, Seyss-Inquart was brought into the execution chamber, and his identity was confirmed before he was led up to the scaffold. He was led up the steps before he was handed over to John C. Woods. His final words were recorded as, "I hope that this execution is the last act of tragedy of the Second World War, and that the lessons taken from this World War will be that peace and understanding should exist between people. I believe in Germany." He was then shuffled over the trapdoor before a hood was placed over his head, followed by the noose. Quickly Woods then pulled the lever, and Arthur Seyss-Inquart plunged to his death, and his time of death was recorded at 2:59 a.m, 9 minutes after the previous execution. This leads us to believe that his execution went smoothly compared to some of the other condemned defendants. Arthur Seyss-Inquart inflicted a significant degree of suffering in his time serving within Hitler's Third Reich and government. He was trusted by the dictator of Germany with regards to his work towards other countries such as Austria and the Netherlands. But within these countries he caused chaos and sent thousands to their deaths for their defiance against the Nazi occupation. He was also complicit and involved in the Holocaust and involved in the mass murders of dozens of thousands, sending them to their deaths inside of concentration camps. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, Thank you so much for watching.